Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome to Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Friday, November 22nd, and before we get into our defensive keys of the game for Baylor against Houston, here is our visit with Baylor sophomore outside linebacker Kyler Jordan. Kyler, hope you're doing well, man. It's been a few weeks since we last visited after that Colorado game, and now completely opposite end of the spectrum from the end of that game, losing on the Hail Mary. Obviously, I don't know if you want me to remind you of that or not, but now you're on a 4-game winning streak, completely flipped the script. I mean, what's the difference of emotions? Like, do you even remember that time? Does it seem like a year ago now that you lost that game and then everything you've been through since then?
It definitely feels like it was a year ago. I mean, with the 2 bye weeks, how many games we played in between. But just like you said, flipping the script, man, it's just there's nothing like it. Just the locker room, like we got a lot more belief, more confidence, obviously, with winning games, but just a completely different feel.
There was this reoccurring theme, I feel like, after the bye week that was just kind of like, I think everyone in that locker room believed, y'all are so much better than what your record said. And you just had to put it on the field. What's the vibe now that you have put some of that on the field and gotten to 6-4 and bowl eligible?
Yeah. I mean, I think it just feels like we're just clicking on all cylinders. I think defense as a whole, I think we can play a lot better. But offense has just been blowing it out of the water. Special teams has been great. Making plays, getting offense, good scoring position, things like that. It really just so much confidence that comes with that. And with confidence comes a lot more success. Just seeing the confidence that our offense is playing with right now is just awesome.
Yeah, so playing off that, against West Virginia, I think it was the first 3 4th down attempts they had, y'all got to stop. And that kind of separated. So, like, you might say, oh, the defense did this or didn't do this, but those were 3 key moments. That's basically getting a turnover. Was that something that, like, you knew going into the game that they're going to try to do that? And how big of an emphasis has that been of getting 4th down stops as important as they are?
Oh, huge. For the most part, we've been pretty solid on 3rd down. So it was definitely an emphasis going into West Virginia, knowing that they were going to go for it on 4th down a little bit more. Like, those were downs that we needed to win. If they're gonna not punt and try to continue the drive, that's something that, like, we need to stop it there.
I feel like y'all as a defense, it's been an interesting year because it'll be like you have a great half and then a bad half, and then just those roller coaster of things. What have y'all discussed about that, and how hungry are y'all to put together a full 4-quarter display?
Super hungry. It's just we just know what we're capable of. It's just like we've seen it, we've put it on film. Just like you said, it's been for 2 quarters here, 3 quarters here, a half here. It's just like trying to put it all together for 4 quarters, and I feel like we're just waiting to do that. And I think this week would be a good one to start.
Yeah, so one of the strong suits of the defense has been obviously sacks and getting tackles for behind the line of scrimmage. And obviously that starts with your position at that edge jack position. And how much pride do you take, and not only for just you, but the entire defense, of creating disruption, getting to the quarterback, and sacking West Virginia 4 times with Garrett Green. That was a really impressive number based on what they've given up. And obviously you want to build on that. But how much satisfaction you get from getting tackles for loss in the games like that and in big moments?
Yeah, it just changes the game. You're going from whether it being 2nd and 7 to 2nd and 13. So just kind of flips the script on the mind. They're probably going to be trying to throw the ball here. It allows you to kind of get a little more aggressive in terms of pass rush and things like that. but just our defensive line has been playing really, really well in terms of pass rush and just do whatever they can to create disruption. Yeah.
In the matchup this weekend, Garrett Green had 100 yards rushing, over 100 yards rushing in the first half. Y'all are about to face two other mobile quarterbacks, going forward, and hadn't really faced that many up to this point. How big of a test was that in learning experience for y'all? And how do you think y'all can, take that experience and use it for these future games?
Huge. Yeah, huge. We knew what we were getting into, and we didn't do a very good job of containing him. We knew that pretty much if his first read wasn't there, he was going to get out of there. So I think just this week, putting a little more emphasis on containing the quarterback, and we got a lot better in the second half, I think. After we kind of figured out that's really what they were going to try to do. So just looking forward to build on that.
Yeah, I was going to follow up that. Obviously, in the second half, after West Virginia had, I don't know how many yards it was total, but in the second half, until that last score, they didn't score a point, and I think it was under 100 yards of offense or really close to it. How disappointing. I think Coach Aranda mentioned this. Like, he was pissed off about the last touchdown, and that's happened a couple of times. But like, is that a motivational factor going into the next game of like, we did that, we allowed that score when we didn't need to, even though it didn't mean a lot at the end of the game. You're up by 21, it turns into 14, but still, like, you get that stop, and it's just kind of another feather in the cap, but you couldn't get it done.
Yes, for sure. We did the same thing against Tech, and it's just like, I don't want to say it takes away from the win, but it really does a little bit, It's just kind of like, just got to close it out, Like, our offense does such a good job of closing it out whenever they need to. Like, that's something that we've got to do. And, like, the drop-off between the ones and the twos or the twos and the threes, like, that's something that we need to work on. And so it's definitely, like, something that can take away from the win, but gives you something to build on too.
Right. So you mentioned the offense is clicking on all cylinders, and that you kind of you want the defense to get there as well. How do y'all get there? What's like that next step in your eyes?
Yeah, I think we talked about it before, but just consistency. We've shown that we're capable. We've shown that we can do it. And we just got to put it together for 4 quarters. Yeah, I really just think
it's that simple. Yeah, it is. And I think we've seen that with the second halves. Like, you talk about the BYU game, completely flipped the script in that one. Obviously against Tech, I think you did that a little bit as well, of you shut down and slow down that offense. And you've done it multiple times. And even back to the Utah game and truthfully the Colorado game before the last second Hail Mary in overtime. But, how much pressure does it take off of you, or does it change your mentality knowing that the offense is capable of doing what it does, and knowing like, hey, if we get 2 fourth down stops, this game could be over, or if we get a turnover, this game could be over. And not to say that it wasn't like that in previous years, say last year, or in 2022, but like, how mentally does that just take the pressure off in a lot of ways?
Oh yeah, for sure. Just knowing that, like, you get up the field on third down, like, there's a really, really, really good chance that our offense is going to go score. And, like, even on the special team side, it's like if we can give our offense good field position, like, they're going to do something with it, So it just adds another, like, building block, I would say. Not so worried about, like, oh, defense has to do something, like we got to score or something. It's more of like, let's get our offense the ball back so they can do their thing.
Right. Going into this matchup with Houston, what are some of the things that maybe stand out to you about what they do, and maybe something that they do differently than the other teams that you've faced so far this year?
Yeah, their quarterback's really good. He's really athletic. They got a lot of good skill players. Their defense is really good. Their special teams are good. So I think in terms of, like, our defense, like, this could be a game changer for the rest of the season to go. I think we need to step up and do our part. Houston's defense is really good. That's what...
in this stretch versus the stretch at the beginning of the season, what is Coach Aranda? Is he still the same guy through all this? Have you seen a change from him? And really for the whole coaching staff, what has that been like in letting them see what you're fully capable of in practice and then doing on the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think the spirits are a little higher maybe with the coaches, but like for the most part, like it's been the same, which I think is really cool to see. Just kind of the being able to handle the adversity of the storm, and carrying and just continuing on the same path, trusting your process. I really have not seen a change in Coach Aranda. He's been the same
cool.
through and through. And that's one of the things that I respect so much about that guy.
That's really cool.
Yes, sir.
Kyler, how have you seen yourself grow this season as, a player and at this jack position? Where have you seen the biggest improvements, and how comfortable are you now at that position?
Yeah, a ton. Definitely feel just so much more comfortable than I did last year. I feel like I've really played a good amount of football at this point. I've seen a lot of different teams, played against a lot of different people. So just using that kind of veteran experience, the game just slows down a little bit. You're able to see more, expect more, know what's coming, things like that. But really, like, there's another level of confidence that I feel like I've gained this year. Really, like, in myself, but also just in the team. Just the guys that I get to play next to. Like, I know they're going to do their job, so I need to do mine.
Yeah. Kyler, really appreciate your time today and obviously this week, and good luck on your trip to Houston and in that game against the Cougars.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
So great visit there with Kyler. Obviously, he's had a role in this season. Garmin Randolph, Kyler Jordan, Steve Linton. Those guys have been the three guys at the outside linebacker position that have made an impact. And Kyler, as a sophomore, obviously is going to have a bigger role next year going into his junior year. But he does play key. I mean, he's in early in games and playing quite a bit. And he mentioned that his confidence level growing the more and more he plays. He has a specific role for this team, and I'm really anxious to see him against Houston, as I am for the entire defense against Houston on Saturday. But with that, let's move into our defensive keys of this game for Baylor against Houston. This is a game, man, after this stretch of football that they've played against some really good offensive teams for different reasons and their ability to do different things. You feel good about Baylor's defense in this matchup against Houston. That's not to say that Houston is not capable of doing things a little bit, specifically running the football and being a little bit dangerous with some of their skill positions. But overall, based on what they've put up until this season, you feel pretty good about what Baylor's defense could do against this Houston offense.
Absolutely. This is the best chance and probably the last chance for the defense to really put together a full 4-quarter complete game. Because they're going to be challenged. Like, I think against Kansas, you're inevitably going to give up a little bit. Like, Kansas is a good offense. You're probably going to give up some points. Whoever you play in a bowl game is probably going to have a pretty good offense, at least based on, who they're projected to play. So this feels like the game where the defense can gain a lot of confidence and go out, put together that 4-quarter performance. And for me, like it does with most teams, and specifically this team, stop the run. That's the first key. Stop the run completely. You need to do that. Now, Houston is not good really at anything. They're the worst total offense in yards, worst scoring offense. They're not good at anything, but the best thing they do is run the football. They're 11th in the Big 12 in rushing yards per game at 138 or 143.9 yards per game rushing. That's fine. But they've also had performances that are pretty uneven in Big 12 play, with them being able to run the football and not being able to run the football. And so I think that's very key for Baylor is stop the run game. Because if you stop the run game, then you force the worst passing offense in the Big 12 to have to go beat you and go score points. And they shouldn't be able to do that. Theoretically, Baylor's given up a lot of yards in the pass game this year, but that seems like the best route. That seems like the best option. Slow down, completely try to shut off the run game, force Zion Chris, force these receivers, force this passing game to have to essentially go out there and probably throw for 250 yards and a couple scores if Houston wants to win this game. I think that's the blueprint for success.
Yeah, I think with their run game, if they had a consistent passing offense at all, their run game would be a lot better. So what that tells me that if you go into this game and are not able to play discipline against the run, they can have success. The issue is that if they're not throwing the football, you should be able to basically load the box. And I know that's kind of you want to be balanced on offense like Baylor does, but if you're able to load the box and they still can't throw, that's the key to winning this game. And Baylor struggled in the secondary, so you worry about their ability to still create plays. But man, they like explosive play offense, passing offense number 12, explosive play rushing offense is number 8. But if you look at yards per play, 15th, yards per carry, 10th, yards per pass attempt, 14th, passing efficiency, 13th. They don't get first downs. So like they're not explosive. They don't get first downs. Teams are just able to do kind of whatever they need to do. But when they become undisciplined against them is when they have their success. I mean, if you look at the end of the Kansas State game, which you can talk about a missed holding call on the Houston touchdown right late, but that game was a one possession game. Kansas State made one mistake, and that was not basically filling a gap. And the Zion Chris broke for a touchdown. They win the game in a game that they had no business winning, at least on the offensive side of the ball. You have to be ready to play disciplined defense against the run. If you don't, then it becomes a longer day where they're just possessing the ball for the entire game because you're not doing discipline, not having discipline. The good news is that I don't think Baylor's defense is going to overlook this game. They've struggled to the extent they can't come. They're mentally. Offensively, you worry about that a little bit. Well, maybe they just feel like they can get into a game like this. They don't have to do as much because the Houston offense isn't as good. This defense has no reason to overlook an offense like Houston because of the way that they've played. They've been challenged a lot more, but mentally, if they come into this game overlooking this offense, that's not a good sign for the defense in general.
Exactly. And I think the blueprint here that I'm kind of looking at is like the Kansas game, for instance. KU only gave up 98 yards rushing to Houston, but they gave up 237 through the air, but Houston only scored 14 points. That's the thing, right? If you can take away the run game, it's kind of, I'm not going to say garbage time or fluky for them to score in the passing game, but it's a lot more difficult for them to be efficient if you're, hitting them at, 3.3 yards per carry. Like that's not going to get it done, I don't think, against Baylor. And that's why Kansas had so much success. A few teams have had success. I'm not going to really look at the first couple games because they had Donovan Smith at quarterback. Since Zion Chris took over, they've been much better running the football. And I think they've leaned into that a lot more. And I mean, you see it in their numbers. I mean, it's gone up ever since then. Their worst rushing performance since he entered the starting role is that Kansas game. But outside of that, I mean, they've been, pretty much kind of like 145, 150 yard type rushing team. And so that's a little dangerous. I will say the Kansas State game is a bit of an outlier just because when you look at what they've done all year, you look at Zion Chris's numbers, he's been a pretty erratic and inaccurate quarterback. In that game, he was 12 of 12.
Yeah.
And so he was just efficient. Now, he only had 111 yards passing, but 12 of 12, I mean, if you're never throwing incompletions, you're putting yourself in a very good position to move the chains and win the football game. I don't see him being able to replicate that, especially if Baylor can take away the run game, which K-State wasn't fully able to do.
Yeah. My first key, and it kind of all this plays hand in hand, but third down defense versus third down offense here. Baylor's third down defense, with all of the struggles that they've had, they're number 3 in third down defense. Houston's number 16 in third down offense. You go to fourth down offense, Houston's number 14. Baylor struggles more on fourth downs at 14th. But that matchup right there kind of tells you everything you need to know. And if Baylor's getting off the field in third and fourth downs, we just talked to Kyler about this, that mindset of getting off the field on fourth down, knowing that takes away a possession, potential scoring opportunities, just like a turnover. If you're doing that, specifically on fourth down, you're going to deflate Houston a lot. They're going to want to be aggressive in this game offensively to an extent. They're not super aggressive offensively. They kind of play and let their defense do the work. But Baylor's matchup, third down defense versus Houston's third down offense, is one that's could be big, especially if you're getting them into third and long situations where they don't want to pass the ball. That's where the turnovers come. That's where more sacks come. And Baylor's defense could thrive. And truthfully, I mean, let's go back. What's the worst offense that Baylor has faced this season? Was it Utah in the second half? Well, yeah. Besides, I'm thinking more of Power 5, but yes, Air Force.
It would be. Air Force is the most comparable, I think, to Houston.
Yeah, it is.
I guess second half against Utah, sure. That's probably a fair comparison.
And Baylor, I mean, they didn't give up anything. And from that point, you talk about Colorado, you talk about BYU, who is kind of a mid offense. They're really good on defense. But you saw what Baylor did in the second half against BYU's offense. It's definitely not like Iowa State. Like there's no real comparisons to set a baseline for expectations other than Air Force or maybe the second half against Utah and Baylor
the
in
first
both
three
those games.
Yeah, the first 3 games of the year are the closest comparisons. Baylor has been challenged by a bunch of different offenses since then, particularly ones that can attack your secondary, which has been an issue for probably the biggest issue, I would say, for Baylor this year.
Yeah. And I would say the West Virginia game, passing wise, was the least of those. And Baylor in that game held Garrett Green to less than 50% passing. He threw an interception. And I mean, I guess he had a couple of explosive plays, but you expect that from that West Virginia. You don't expect that from this Houston offense.
And 4 pass interferences, which skew the numbers, but those also do factor in when you're watching the game, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would say in that game, 3 of those, 1 of those were legit, 3 of them weren't, but they're going to call them. And Baylor's been called for them all year. And it's kind of the reputation they have right now. So I think if you can be good of not getting into situations where they're able to run it on 3rd and short, get them into 3rd and longs, you're going to do pretty well in this game.
I agree 100% with that. I mean, Baylor being second in the Big 12 in total, 3rd down conversion defense at 34% is awesome. I've brought this up for 3 straight weeks now, but Utah is at 24% success, as far as opponent 3rd down conversion, 24%. That's nuts. The elite of the elite. I don't know where that is in the nation, but it's got to be in the top 5, maybe even number 1.
I would say it might be number 1, and that's insane considering the offensive struggles they've had. Like you can basically say, why are you not folding it in at this point? Because
right.
that is nuts. I'm going to pull it up real quick because that is a legit number.
Yeah, it's very legit. It keeps growing as well, but. I only bring it up because it's very glaring, but Baylor being second is terrific. And when you look at Houston being dead last, they're not just dead last. I mean, they're at 26%. The next worst team in the Big 12 as far as 3rd down conversion rate is at 32%. So they're 6% lower than the second worst team. So they're far and away the worst 3rd down conversion offense. Yeah. I think a lot of it comes down to them being very conservative on 3rd downs at times, running the football, not trying to throw it on 3rd and long. But then you look over at the 4th down conversion, and like you've mentioned, they're 3rd in the Big 12 in going for it on 4th down. They go for it a lot. And so I think when they get in situations where it's like, hey, we might not have another drive like this for another quarter, we should probably try to go for it here and try to get some sort of points. Yeah. And so I think that's going to be a big key in this one. And I think that is a perfect one to bring up, because if Baylor's going to have that complete dominant performance, it's going to start on 3rd down.
Yeah. You mentioned Utah. They're number in conference play only. I mean, in all games, they're number 1 3rd down defense. In conference play only, they're number 2. The next closest in the Big 12 is Texas Tech, which is interesting. They're number 23 at 33%. And then Baylor's number 3 all the way down at number 45 in the country. So there's this massive gap. And I haven't looked at where national ranking is for Houston on 3rd down conversions, but it's way, they're 131 in all games. And I mean, they've struggled, and we know that going in. It's been the flip of what Baylor has faced, offensive versus defensive teams in the last 4 games. Now you're facing a better defense with an offense that just doesn't do much. And it's just a game. Like you don't want to have expectations of, I go back to the Air Force game. If you're giving up more than 7 points in that game against Air Force, there's issues. And I feel a lot of the same ways with this. It's like, okay, is it more about the offenses that you're facing, or is it more about your own defense? Baylor has shown in spots. You talk about 3rd down defense, tackles for loss, not in points scored, but like yards per carry defense. They're a pretty good team. But then is it the teams you're facing? Is it what it is? We know they face good offenses. You get in this game against Houston, all these numbers better go up by a couple spots where they're able to go up by a couple spots. It's going to help the average. Baylor's just had an unfortunate run of facing what I would say the most explosive teams or the most consistent offensive teams until this point.
They have. And I think that is the biggest question, right? Is, does Baylor now turn the corner for this matchup? I kind of think they will. I kind of think this is the game that sets up very well for every defense, honestly, in the entire country to face Houston. Like, in general, except for Rice, everyone has really been able to hold down this offense. I guess TCU as well, but that was more because of turnovers, not because Houston was doing whatever they wanted on offense. So I think that is a very interesting factor and something that I'm definitely taking into account. There should be high expectations for Baylor's defense going into this game. My next key for this game is Zion Chris. We mentioned the run game. I think specifically now, quarterback run is the next area that I'm going to go after. And I know it goes all into rushing yards, but what we just saw from Garrett Green running for well over 100 yards, doing a lot of that in the first half, has Baylor learned from that? Have they grown from that? Are they able to stop this running attack? And, you know, if you're able to hold running backs to 50 yards rushing, you got to feel like you're doing a great job. But then if you're giving up 100 yards to the quarterback, well, you didn't really do a good job of stopping the run. And so you look at what Zion Chris has done this year. He had 97 yards rushing against TCU. That's his high for the season. So he hasn't gone more than that. But a key thing for him is he's had double-digit carries in 4 of their last 5 games. The only game that he didn't was Kansas, where he only had 2 carries and they lost 42-14. So that's been a very interesting key to this game. If you're allowing him to run consistently a lot, he can go out there and move the chains for them and get them wins with his legs. I think he did that against Kansas State.
Yeah, I think the concern there, and it's a lot of the way that you face against West Virginia, is that those other running backs are pretty explosive. I mean, they don't have a ton of yards, but when they get out, like Stacey Snead has a 65-yard run. Jamarian Burnett has a 54-yard run. Rashawn Sanford, who is our leading rusher, has a 38-yard run. So not that 38's not that, but they have that ability, if you're really dialing it into the quarterback, that they have the ability to be explosive. And that comes down to the edges. It comes down to Kyler Jordan's position. It comes down to Steve Linton, Garmin Randolph, your outside linebackers, making sure they're playing discipline on the run game. Because if you're going to take away the run game from the quarterback and you're set on doing that to keep him from being explosive, you better account for those running backs as they have that ability. I mean, you go back to the Iowa State game, they didn't score a single point in that game against Iowa State, but they exposed Iowa State in the run game. And then now we've seen it. Iowa State's ability to stop the run has fallen off a cliff, and they were the first ones that really did it, besides Iowa, who runs the ball on everybody. But, you know, you don't want him to beat you because he's going to have the ball in his hands every single play. He has 89 rushes. That is the number one. The next closest is 75 on their team. So he's going to have the ball in his hands a ton. He's going to get sacked a ton. They get their 14th in the sacks given up in Big 12 play with 2.71. They're 16th in tackles for loss with 8 per game. So this is a game where Baylor's strengths versus weaknesses set up, and that's my key to the point. Make Houston who they are. They're going to want, they're going to run the football. Get them behind the chains, because if you're getting sacks, I mean, that number is, I don't know what their sack rate is. They don't throw the ball. I mean, they literally do not throw the ball at all. And you're giving up 2.71 sacks per game.
It's because they're playing from behind. So in the games where they're playing from behind, it just snowballs, right? So if you can get out to a lead and force them to throw on 2nd and 8, and then also again on 3rd and 8, you're going to have chances for sacks. They're 116th nationally in sacks allowed. So very, very bad there.
Yeah. So Zion Chris been sacked 12 times. He was sacked 4 times against Kansas State, 2 times against Arizona most recently. Utah, interestingly, didn't sack him at all, and that's a game they won. TCU sacked him 3 times, but I'm assuming that some of these numbers go back to Donovan Smith, and that might have been a reason they just couldn't stick with him. I want to look at these numbers really quick. But yeah, this is bad. UNLV, 6 sacks. Oklahoma, 2 sacks. Rice, 3 sacks. Then he played a lot against Kansas. He was sacked 5 times in that game. So 17 sacks by Donovan Smith, or against Donovan Smith, and then 12 against Zion Chris. That's 29 on the season. Really, whoever's playing is getting sacked. If their numbers aren't high for one game, it's because they didn't play, is what it looks like. And so Baylor has to do a good job of that. And we've seen, you talk about Steve Linton, you talk about Garmin Randolph, you talk about Jackie Marshall, and those are in the sack numbers. Tackles for loss, everybody's getting them. Matt Jones is getting them. This just feels like, the more I look at it, this just feels like a game where Baylor could have a really disruptive game, and maybe they finally get some turnovers based on what the front seven's doing.
That would be nice, right? To see some more turnovers and some more, I guess, positive regression in that regard. It feels like, again, we've talked about all year, you get to the middle point of the year and you pretty much are who you are in that area.
Yeah.
They forced one against West Virginia, and feels like one is like, wow, that was good performance, like really needed that, because they haven't really been a team that's been able to snowball a bunch of turnovers out of people. But who knows? Yeah, maybe that can change in this game if you're able to get some pressure, maybe force a fumble on a sack or something along those lines. That would be key. I think, this next area is more just, I think it kind of goes in line with what we talked about at the beginning. I just feel like, if not now, when? For this defense. This is the moment where they should be able to put together 4 quarters. And putting together 4 quarters against Houston, to me, that means that you're not giving up probably more than, I would probably say, 17 points max. I could see a scenario.
A lot.
It is, but I could see a scenario where I leave, after watching the game, if they give up 17 points, I could see a scenario where I probably am like, wow, they put together 4 quarters. If you give up more than that, then no, there's no chance. And yeah, 17 is a lot for them. I'm probably not going to project them to get quite that much. But I just think in general that this feels like the time, right? Get after the quarterback, stop the run, create pressure, get tackles for loss, force bad third down opportunities, get off the field and get your offense the ball as many times as possible. It feels like that kind of game. But you look at what Baylor's done over the last few games, and it also feels like they could give up some explosive plays and could give up a few drives here or there where they just can't get off the field. And so it's something that I'm really looking at. It's been a key for Dave Aranda all year. Play 4 quarters, haven't done it once yet. So is now the time, or is it never going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, I feel, and that's the thing. I think you face these teams that have the ability to expose you. And you look at the offenses that Baylor's faced, just FEI alone, what Baylor has faced. And then you're talking about Colorado 31, BYU at 48, Texas Tech at 72 is just still a weird number. Oklahoma State at 50, which we know their running game struggles. But it's TCU 22, West Virginia 38, and then boom, Houston 112. Like, if you're not going to do it right now, but I feel like those teams have the ability to expose you. And maybe TCU's more one-dimensional, Colorado's one-dimensional, but they have the ability to really put something together in the pass game and expose you. You don't see anything about Houston that just says, oh, it's going to snowball, and you could play a good half and then they're going to get theirs in the second half, or you play a good first half and they, or play a bad first half and you get their stops in the second half. This seems like a game that you come out and you're focused and you play well, that you have – 17 points is still – that just seems like a lot. But I guess they did score 24 against Kansas State, which has been a pretty good defense, as we know, and they scored 17 against Utah. So maybe there's a path to that. I think the difference being is that if Baylor can control the game offensively and not turn the football over, that's where you're talking 7 to 10 points difference. Because if you're not giving them short fields, you're staying on the field and scoring yourself. Now, if you go and score 45 points in this game, that 17 number fluctuates, but they're not going to, I don't think they're going to score 45. Maybe they do. I just don't see it. Maybe they get a pick 6 and it bumps it up there. But yeah, like if you're going into this game giving up more than 17 points, I would be very disappointed. And I felt, you go back to the game against Air Force and even the first game against Tarleton, like there's those deciding factors of like, if you're giving up more than X amount of points, then you feel really bad. This is one of those games. Like, I couldn't pinpoint how many points Iowa State was going to score. Like, it's kind of like, it could fluctuate depending on the rate of the game, or Texas Tech or West Virginia. But in this game, there's a hard ceiling for this Houston offense. And if you're giving more up than that hard ceiling, man, that's not, I couldn't be too excited about that, even with a win going into that game against Kansas where you're trying to get an 8th win.
I agree completely. I mean, you look at what they've done this year. They've had a bunch of games where they've scored, 3 points or 0 points. And so, like, there is an opportunity for Baylor here to give up 6 points in this game, or post a shutout, or do something, special defensively. And I do think that I think the defense this week is kind of taking that to heart. It definitely felt that way based on what Kyler was saying, just like, this is an opportunity. This is when we need to, really step up this week, because they know how good Houston's defense is. They know that the offense is going to need some help in this game. And I think they're I think they're going to be up for the challenge for the most part. It's just, I think over the past few weeks, our minds get kind of skewed by how the defense has played against these offenses that are all performing at a rather high level in the Big 12. And so I think we see it and go, wow, there's no way Baylor's going to be able to give up, less than 28 points or whatever, because it just feels like things have snowballed. But we also have to keep the perspective that when Baylor has faced really bad offenses, for the most part, they've had success. And I know that, you can point to a couple here and there. I think BYU is a good offense, especially when you compare it to the other ones. But you look at Utah in the second half, dominated there. Air Force, Tarleton State, dominated there. And that's the kind of offense we're talking about for Houston this year. Let's be clear, this offense is nowhere near BYU, even if we say BYU as a middle-of-the-pack offense. They are way behind that. So I think that's important to keep in mind, and just something that I have to keep in mind, especially this week, because of just how Baylor's schedule is laid out.
Yeah, I mean, Houston scored 33 against Rice. That's their season high. They scored 30 against TCU, and we talked about that becoming off of turnovers, and then 24 was the next most they scored. They scored 14 or less points 6 times in 10 games. And they did have a stretch there where it's like, okay, are they figuring it out? Even though they got blown out by Kansas, they scored 14 there, and that was the lowest that they had for a 4-game stretch. And they come back and score 3 against Arizona last week. And both of you and I were like, that's a game they could very well win because of their defense, and their offense just laid an egg. And I think that Arizona probably treated them much differently than, let's say, Utah and Kansas State did. Now, Utah has their own offensive issues, so that would make sense. Kansas State losing that game is still like a what the heck happened. They shut down their offense. They held Kansas State to 19 points, and that's the reason they won that game. And they won it late on a busted play, 50-yard touchdown run by Zion Chris, and that's what Baylor can't let happen in this game. So I don't know if we really hit on all of the keys. I think I lost count of which ones I was doing in that, but I think everyone gets the idea of what needs to happen in this game. Just play disciplined defense. And with that, let's move into our game picks, game predictions. And, it goes back to this defense, man. If they're able to do what they should do, this game should not be close. It's an 8-point game, 8-point spread right now. And I think some of that, some credibility that Houston built up in that stretch where they were scoring and obviously winning games. But right now, I still don't feel like that if Baylor plays and to the focus level they should defensively, that this game should be a game that Houston wins.
I would agree with that. I definitely think Baylor is in a great spot to win this game. I think this is an opportunity for the defense to play well. This is an opportunity for the offense to prove it once again against a good defense, one of the better defenses they'll face this year. And just kind of that perfect opportunity for complimentary football that I know Dave Aranda is striving for this program to get to on a weekly basis. So for that reason, I'm going to take Baylor. I don't think Houston can score enough to keep up with the Bears in this game, but I also don't think Baylor's just going to light up the scoreboard like they have in the past weeks. But I'm going to take Baylor to take care of business in this one, 30-13.
Yeah, I like that. I like the pick. Kind of deciding what I'm going to go, which direction I was going to go. I look back to the FEI defenses and where Houston ranks, because I think that's what it hinges on is what Baylor, how good is Houston's defense really? And FEI defenses, and these are all subjective because I still don't freaking understand how Texas Tech's the number 36 FEI defense, but it is what it is. Colorado is now 22nd, BYU 16, Iowa State's 23, Texas Tech's 36, Houston's 42. All those teams were higher, and Baylor was able to score at least 21 points in every single one of those games. And 3 of those games came before Baylor had a rushing attack. The Tech game being 36, which is the closest to Houston's 42nd, Baylor put up 59 points. I do think that the way that Houston plays offensively and the way they're going to shrink games impacts the total point number. But like I wouldn't be surprised if Baylor scored 35 points in this game. Like you said, 30. Like I'm in the mindset of if Baylor's offense continues executing at the same level and the defense plays well and they get a couple of short fields, like they can maybe score 40. But I think the safe bet is close to what you're saying. I would say 35-14 final score. And maybe one of them's a late score. I think Baylor has control of this game. And I think people in general are kind of overlooking Baylor, because when you look at the advanced analytics, it's so skewed offensively, and to an extent defensively, but mainly offensively. You throw in the Utah game and then those first 3 Big 12 games where they didn't have a rushing game, it all changed once they got it. So you have 4 games that are really influencing advanced analytics offensively. I think Baylor's not getting enough credit offensively, even though they're still, like, you look at it, Baylor's still, I think, 21. Where is it? 21 offensive FEI. I think that's closer to like a top 15, top 10 type offense as of right now. And that's why I go with 35-14 final score.
Right. I think people are just behind on the fact that this Baylor team is playing like a top 3 team in the Big 12 right now. That's just what it is. And that's because K-State has dropped off. Iowa State has dropped off. Like, these teams have taken losses and Baylor just keeps winning. And I think that that's kind of the area that I think a lot of people are missing. I think, when I look at the college football playoff rankings and I see Missouri at 23 in the rankings or UNLV at 22, and I sit there and go, I think Baylor would be favored on a neutral site against both of them. And so I think that that's kind of where we're at right now with this Baylor team. I do think it is a fringe top 25 team at this very moment.
The way it's playing,
the way it's playing. And that doesn't mean that we can just overlook the first 6 weeks and say they should be ranked, but it's more so saying that if we truly are going to go by an eye test, then I believe that Baylor is right on that fringe of being a top 25 team and operating at that level, which I don't know if Houston is going to be the team that slows that down.
Yeah, to put it in perspective, there's a Gary Seegers, I believe it is, on BetUS. He said in their game outlook last week against West Virginia that the last 4 games by both West Virginia and Baylor was, in his numbers, a 15-point favorite. They won by 14. That didn't equate the entire year. So you look at these lines of 8 points. I think there's this path to, in this game, that this should be like a 21-point favorite. Now, you're not going to get that on the road. That 21's a big line for everybody, for anybody, but the analytics kind of point in that direction of, like, Baylor might not be that good defensively, but the areas that they're good in are good enough to stop what Houston does. Then offensively, they can take advantage. Houston's a good defense, not a great defense. And I don't know what that number would be for this week. I don't think he's put it out, but I think that's kind of the way I feel about this game. It all comes down to Baylor's mental state. If they are able to go in there and still play with their hair on fire and come out swinging, Houston just doesn't have the firepower to keep up, and then they'll start taking risk on both on defense and offense, and maybe the game snowballs on them. But if you let them keep it close and you're not playing discipline on defense, they can keep it close that way. I mean, that's the reality. We saw it against Kansas State, and Kansas State's 4-3 in the Big 12. They're not. They lost to who did they lose to earlier? They lost to BYU by 30 points. So that wins. Yes,
lost
and no.
to Arizona State this past weekend.
Yeah, and they didn't look good in that game at all. I mean, they struggled. And Arizona State's pretty good, but Tech also beat Arizona State. The Big 12 is just a cluster for the most part. We knew that going in. Now it's really showing its head. But I just think if Baylor plays well the way they've been playing, even if they say status quo defensively, I still think they're okay in this game. If they play above their heads or play better, then it's going to be a big victory for Baylor.
Exactly. If these two teams play their normal, it's a pretty easy Baylor win. If Baylor plays terrible and Houston plays really well, then Houston might be able to find a way to claw this one out by like a field goal. But if Baylor plays really well and Houston plays really bad, I mean, you could, in theory, be looking at like a 4-score win for Baylor. Yeah. I do feel like it could get that bad. Like if Baylor won the turnover battle like Arizona did, like 3-1, I could see it getting really out of hand. And I mean, in truth, the Arizona game was kind of out of hand.
Yeah. Especially for Arizona's sake. Arizona's not scoring a ton. If you start talking about equating fourth down potential of stopping them on fourth down on top of Houston actually turning the football over, that's where it could really get bad. But, I think you have to give Houston respect. I think that's in loss of all this is like they have a path to making this a good game and winning. They've done it all season. For them to be 4-6 now with 2 games to go, still in bowl eligibility contention, it's a major credit to that staff and what they've done in a short time. It's just not because of the offense, and that's what they're going to need in this game to win. So any final thoughts on this matchup with Baylor and Houston and where this could potentially lead into a Kansas game next week for Baylor looking for win number 8?
This is a great chance for Baylor to complete the Texas sweep and go through this schedule, beating all the Texas schools that they faced on their schedule. And that would be That'd be big, I think, for recruiting purposes and everything like that. I do want to mention, I appreciate you saying that about Houston. Willie Fritz has done a really good job, and I think it's important to acknowledge that this Houston team coming into the year, I think a lot of people projected them to win 2 games this year. And they have found a way to get to 4 games and be very competitive in a few other games as well. And that is a huge credit to that staff that has them playing very, very hard for their coach and for each other.
Yeah, poor Utah, man. Poor Utah being one of those losses, and the way. I mean, honestly, though, if they have Cam Rising, and I'm not getting on a Utah tangent here, but that team, I think they lost a lot offensively, a lot of mojo whenever that all happened. Obviously, you've seen what happened. So Houston did beat them though, and this pretty impressive resume builder for Willie Fritz. So, all right, Baylor fans, that's going to do it for this episode of Inside Baylor Sports. Thanks to Kyler Jordan for joining us once again. Have a great Friday. Obviously, a game weekend this weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday. Sig and Bears.